Let's get joined up. This week's show is sponsored by Bandcamp.com, an online record store and music community where passionate fans discover, connect with, and directly support the artists they love. There's thousands of bands and artists on there, including my band, the Rye Dogs, whose second album, Pigs Might Fly, is out right now. Here's a quick snippet of the title track, which is also available on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Music.
Because your eyes may be weeping, but your conscience is sleeping. So baby, don't you cry. Your faces are drying and you say...
It's totally free to join Bandcamp, and as the Rye Dogs are brand new members, we're now looking to grow our fan base, so your support would be greatly appreciated. Just search the Rye Dogs, that's W-R-Y Dogs, and hit the follow button. Right, now we can cue the theme tune.
Joined up writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 162 with Harriet Kline, author of the excellent debut novel This Shining Life. I've read This Shining Life and it really is a brilliant book that I highly recommend. We talk about Harriet's path to publication, how her job as a registrar influenced some of the themes of the book, and why momentum is everything when you're writing a novel. It's a brilliant conversation that I should have put out weeks ago had my brain not been fried by work, life and writing, so apologies for that. Speaking of which, I continue to chip away at the new version of my novel Safe Hands as my new POV character Hazel takes on a life of her own and fills my every waking and non-waking moment. My word count hasn't been amazing, but I do feel like I've spent many hours both consciously and subconsciously thinking about Hazel's journey and its impact on my story. I really do have to get better at actually getting the words down though, because even when my day job gets busy, that seems to be the problem, as that seems to be the time that I lose my momentum and become less productive. And like most things, it's just a state of mind. You know, when your brain is tired from work or full of upcoming projects and plans, it can feel impossible to carve out some time and find the focus required to work on your writing. But it's not really impossible, it's just more difficult. I often find it takes me longer to get started, but once I'm up and running, I can pick up where I left off. So I might go back to the Pomodoro technique of short-timed writing sprints during these busy work times, because I don't know about you, but I find it sometimes works to trick myself into getting something done by telling myself, well, it's only 15 minutes and 15 minutes is better than nothing. So I set a timer on my phone, and the only rule is I can't stop writing, even if I think it's terrible, for the duration of the timer. And what often happens is that by the time the buzzer goes off, I've found some kind of flow and I actually want to write for longer. So give it a try and let me know how you get on, and I'll report back on the next episode. You know I love to hear from you all, so do drop me a line. I try to reply to every message, and it's brilliant to hear what you're up to, what you think works or doesn't with the show, and if there's anything you'd like to hear more of in future episodes. And the best way you can get in touch is via email, wayne@waynekellyWrites.com, but you can also tweet me at JUPodcast or drop me a line on the FB page. Also, don't forget, I tell you every week, but not many of you actually take me up on it, to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free. I don't spam you or anything like that. You get a couple of downloadable goodies when you signed up, and you'll be the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. Right, let's get to today's much delayed interview with Harriet Kline, which I actually recorded back in August. So Harriet works part-time registering births, deaths and marriages, and writes for the rest of the week. Her story Ghost won the Hissac short story competition, and Chest of Drawers won the London Magazine short story competition. Other short stories have been published online with Litro, For Book's Sake, and on BBC Radio 4. She lives in Bristol with her partner and 2 teenage sons, and her debut novel, This Shining Life, is out right now. So enjoy the chat, and I'll pop back at the end for a sign-off. Okay, Harriet, thanks so much for joining me on Joined Up Writing. I really appreciate it. So why don't you start off by telling us, how things are, and tell us where you're speaking from. Give us a sense of where you are.
Okay, so I live in Bristol, so I'm sitting at the moment in my very little space at the bottom of our loft stairs where I do my writing. So when I'm on Zoom calls, I have it very perfectly arranged so that you can see all the books behind me.
Yeah.
But on the other side, there's all sorts of junk. There's my partner's musical instruments and all sorts of bits and pieces. It's a tiny little space. It's quite chilly, so I'll sit here writing with a hot water bottle and a blanket. But it's nice. I've got a view of the street and the neighbours, doing their bits and pieces. So very nice place to be.
It's nice. It sounds cosy.
It is.
Yeah, it sounds good. So why don't you start off by telling us about the premise for your debut book, This Shining Life?
Yes, it's a book about a boy whose father has died. He's 11, and he's trying to puzzle his way through grief. It's completely blown his mind, basically. He's trying to understand what on earth he is to make of all this emotion. And while he's doing this, the adults are on their own journeys through bereavement, so they're not really able to help him. And so he thinks that his father's left him a puzzle to solve. He's trying to solve it, and the adults really don't understand what's going on. So it's really his journey through bereavement and everyone else's journey through it too.
Well, congratulations on the book. It's brilliant. I've read it and I absolutely loved it. So where do you kind of remember where the first seed of the idea started? Do you remember when it kind of came to you when you started putting things together?
Yes, I do. I was present at the death of a very dear friend. It was probably the saddest moment of my life, but it was also a kind of very immense and humbling and quite transformative experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember I was actually there and I was standing at the foot of the bed watching the colour in his face recede. And there was nothing I could do at that moment, really, except what was going on and let it happen, let each moment unfurl as it occurred. And I don't think I've ever been so present, actually, and so alive to my feelings, because it was horrible, but I just had to let them come.
Mm-hmm.
And I think after that, I really noticed that I was much more alive to everything else that was happening around me. And so that included sadness and grief, but it also included joy, because somehow I'd become alive by being aware of what death was, really. So I just couldn't leave that alone. I just kept thinking about it. And then what I noticed was that as time went on, it didn't last. And before long, I was just back being this normal person, not very present, thinking, sort of just thinking my usual thoughts and wanting to be in that really authentic place and not being able to get there. And then I was looking around at all the other people who were grieving alongside me and thinking, actually, they're going through the same thing. We've each got some aspect of ourselves that stops us being truly present and truly authentic. And so I think that's when I thought, right, I'm going to write a multi-voiced narrative, and I'm going to have each person have one aspect of themselves that's in the way of their truly being alive.
Well, that's such a lovely story, such a great story. And you're so right as well. I think we've all had that where, whether we've actually been present in the way that you were, but when you lose somebody that's close to you and it kind of shocks you out of your system for a short space of time, and you suddenly think, why am I doing the things that I'm doing, and why haven't I achieved the things I said I was going to achieve, and why am I doing this and not that, and life's very short and all the rest of it. But it does wear off, doesn't it?
It does, and you miss it, and then you sort of go through a kind of grieving process for that. And I think there is this sort of feeling that there's a purity that you get when that bubble has burst, really, that says, because you don't ever really think about death. I think, and actually it's quite healthy to really understand that this is part of being human and part of being alive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But as you say, it's probably a coping mechanism or something that stops us from dwelling on it, I suppose.
Yes, I think so. And so it's really about getting the balance, and you need to sort of be aware of where your coping mechanisms are helping you and where actually they're just getting in the way of your being truly alive.
So you mentioned there that the book's told through multiple POVs, and our main guide is kind of the first-person perspective of Ollie. So tell us a little bit more about Ollie and why you wanted to tell the story kind of through his eyes.
Yeah, I think I wanted him to be first person and to be, he's actually in a slightly different time frame than everyone else. So he's telling the story from one place in the narrative, and then everyone else is experiencing it in a different place. And I really actually, that kind of happened by accident, but I wanted to keep it because I wanted him to feel, I wanted the reader to feel that he was slightly alone. I don't actually say it in the book, but he's very obviously autistic.
Sure, yeah.
And one of the things that I know from the people that I know and love who are autistic is that, you know, quite often what they might be experiencing is very different from what everyone else is experiencing, because they're dealing with, you know, their own mental processes, really. I mean, I think this isn't just true of autism. I think anyone, you know, who's depressed or got a tummy ache or whatever will be having a different experience from everyone else. But I think for Ollie, I felt very clearly that that's what I wanted to portray. And I think his kind of, he needing to work things out all the time. And I think that was what I wanted to show, really, is how you have to, you know, and I think when you're grieving, you have to work things out all the time. So there was a kind of parallel, really, with his experience and the experience of everyone else, but they don't know it. They don't sort of know that they are sort of going through a similar process.
Yeah, they're trying to solve their own puzzle, if you like, but not in such a literal way as he is.
Yes, exactly. And so he's got an actual puzzle, but actually everyone's alongside him trying to sort it out.
So you did such a good job of, obviously you mentioned the autism there, which, as you say, you never explicitly state. It doesn't need to be said by anybody in the book. It's kind of just really well written. And you did a great job of putting us in his shoes and kind of showing us how he sort of sees the world. So how did you go about achieving that? Was there lots of research involved? You mentioned there you probably know people that have autism.
Yes, I mean, I'm close to quite a few autistic people. So I think probably ever since I've known those people, I've kind of been always wondering what are they thinking and trying to get inside their shoes, whether or not, you know, you can only do that with anybody to a certain extent. But I think because I've just thought about that so much, and I think that's a really important part of relating to people, I think it was fairly easy for me to imagine, right, you know, what is going on for this character that I've invented while he's experiencing grief. I mean, he isn't like anyone that I know, actually. He very quickly became himself because he had this very specific process and puzzle to work out. But yes, I think it's really just through knowing quite a few people and also talking to them and, you know, reading a lot of books by autistic people who talk about what it feels like and what they're going through when they're either in meltdown or just sitting there chatting to people, what it is that they're processing. So, you know, I have read a lot about that because just so that to help me relate to all the autistic people that I know and love.
And as you say, I mean, like, excuse me, whether it's autism or whether it's anything else, it's everybody's going to have their own version of that anyway, in terms of the experience that they're living and their background and all the rest of it. So did you, any of your autistic friends, did you kind of, did any of them, have they read it, and did you get a sense of kind of how they feel about it?
Yes, I mean, I did. I mean, it has actually had a sensitivity reader as well, the manuscript. Yeah. But also, yes, I did. I talked to the people that I know, and I think, you know, it was difficult actually, because I kind of thought, oh, you know, how much should I be doing this as a neurotypical person? But in the end, I just decided, well, this is Ollie. It's not anyone that I know. And we did discuss various kind of moments that I kind of felt were particularly about autism. I'm just trying to think of one. I mean, the thing that we talked about most, I think, was masking. So there's a bit in the book where Ollie's mum, Ruth, she says, oh, but you just have to chat to people because it makes them feel nice. And then Ollie says, yeah, but it doesn't make me feel nice. It makes me feel tired because I have to work out what's going on and whether people are actually telling the truth. And I think that's one of the things that we talked about most, was that kind of expectation that neurotypical people have on the autistic person to behave in the way that neurotypical people think they should behave. So I think that's because, I mean, you know, obviously I don't feel like I'm an expert on what it feels like to be autistic, but I do feel like I'm an expert on what it's like to be neurotypical in relation to an autistic person and what my expectations might be. So I kind of was able to use that, turn it round and think, well, what would that feel like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's great. I really enjoyed it, and I thought you did a great job from my perspective anyway. So in terms of you kind of touched on it earlier, but the way that you've kind of structured the book, it's got a really, really clever structure. Did you have a pretty clear idea from the start that that's how you kind of wanted to put it together, or did that evolve during the writing and editing?
That evolved during the writing and editing. In fact, I was in quite a lot of panic through writing it because I just couldn't, for some reason, I couldn't help. I think it was that line, "My dad died," that Ollie returns to again and again. And I just felt that was so completely right. So he had to then be in this separate time scale because I just wanted to have him thinking continually, my dad died. And then I was thinking, but this doesn't work because everyone else has got to go through the process of sort of realizing that his father's going to die and then grieving, and Ollie's already done it. And then suddenly at one point I just wrote the death scene, and I'd been putting it off because I knew it would be quite painful to write.
Sure.
And I wrote it, and then I just thought, that is the end of part one. I just knew it was the end of something. It's kind of like one of those magical writing moments. And at that point, I think the whole structure fell into place. I thought, oh, yes, I know what's going to happen now. We're going to see everything that Ollie's seen, but from everyone else's point of view. So it was kind of, I didn't plan it, but once I knew that it was going to happen, it just kind of made the whole book work.
So do you think it was a case of, despite the fact that you were panicking about it, do you think the thing that kind of saved you was you just kept pushing ahead with it?
Yeah, very much. So I'm kind of hoping that that's going to work with the second book.
Yeah,
but,
it's funny because I've been having similar things with the thing that I'm writing at the minute, and I sort of keep stopping and worrying about how I'm going to solve different things and where I'm going to go. But every time I do that, I end up procrastinating and not actually writing, and sort of freeze myself into inertia. So I think I need to actually just crack on, and I'm sure it'll work itself out, because that's usually what happens, isn't it?
I think so, but it's a really difficult place to be, actually, and it's that trust that you have to have that your mind actually will sort this out. But while it's not doing it, it is actually quite terrifying. But,
it is, yeah.
But yes, I do think keep going and something will resolve.
Something will rattle loose. That's the idea, anyway. So let's go back a little bit. So, well, actually, before we do that, and am I right in thinking that to a certain extent, your part-time job, or the part-time job that you may have had at the time, I don't know whether you've still got it, and tell us what that job was and how it actually influenced the themes of the book, the life and death and everything. Yeah,
so I'm a registrar of births, deaths and marriages, and I am still doing it part-time, which is just such a lovely job to have, actually. It's a real privilege. But of course, one of the things I do is register deaths quite a lot. So I get to see people at that moment when they're really in the process of trying to understand what on earth is going on, and I get to see every single different reaction that you could possibly get. So you do get people who are just numb, you get people who are laughing, you get people who can hardly speak, or who are just really businesslike. And also you get to interact with these people, and sometimes it changes when you're with them. So I think, in terms of really seeing a whole range of people, because there's no one, who lives in Bristol who won't at some point need to use the register office. So I have this privilege of meeting every person from every walk of life, and also seeing them at these really important times, because I also see them at weddings, So again, you get as much joy and misery at a wedding, surprisingly. There's
Yeah.
quite often someone stony faced at the back. So I kind of get to see all this range of emotions, and you just see it in a moment, and you've got to learn to react to it in the moment. So I think that really helps with the writing, because you just think, like, that particular expression sums up happiness, and that's someone who's feeling really awkward, and you kind of have this sort of, it's like a language that you learn, really, of how people show emotion.
And it feels real.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go, as I was going to do. So just let's take a bit of a step back. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and kind of what your earliest memory of writing is?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to be a writer, from really young age. So I grew up in Devon, and This Shining Life is kind of set in this fictional area of Devon. So I think I spent quite a lot of time kind of tramping around the waterfalls and the woods, and I was always describing them to myself, and sort of trying to find stories about the magic of seeing a red squirrel or something. I never did actually see a red squirrel in Devon, but I wrote lots of stories about that. But I do, and I think I always wanted to write. And I do remember when I was about 10, and my parents had split up, and I wrote a story about a woman who was kind of my first feminist story, really, who sort of found herself when she left her husband. But it was hilarious, because I've looked at it since, and she's 32, but I've got her kind of with greying hair.
Because it's so old compared to you, yeah.
Exactly. But I think I always wanted to, and I filled notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of stories about rivers and streams. So I suppose it's no surprise, really, that should appear in This Shining Life.
It's kind of how you got to it. But when do you think you realised that you had a kind of passion or a talent for it? I mean, is it something that you thought you'd sort of end up doing, actually writing a book at some stage?
Yeah, I think I always dreamed I would. Just after university, when I left, I did an English and drama degree, which was great for kind of, the creativity, really. I did sort of spend about a year having a go, writing short stories, and sort of developing my craft, really. I tried a bit of poetry, and I got kind of I did get, the odd story published here and there. I had one on Radio 4, which was great. And I was also a writer in residence at a hospital on the Isle of Wight, which was a fantastic job. Again, getting to know a lot of people, encouraging them to write. But what happened sort of in my early 30s is I just completely burnt out, and I really felt that I just couldn't write. I just felt you had to be driven, and I didn't have it in me to sort of drive myself forward, and I didn't think I was that good. I was okay. And then I had children and various kind of life experiences, and I just realized that the thing that was missing from my life was writing, and I came back to it because I'd had children and I'd grown and I'd been in therapy. I just realized that what I was writing was much deeper, much more what I wanted to say, and that I did have something to say. And I came back to it and I thought, no, this is it. I am going to write a book. And I was really determined that I would write something and get published.
That's brilliant. And I know that you had success, with quite a lot of short stories and things in the past. You mentioned some there with Radio 4 and stuff like that. When did you decide to try your hand at novels? And was it a big adjustment to make? Did you think, was it scary? What did you learn from writing short stories, do you think?
Yeah, I think it was really when I had the idea for the book, and after the death of my friend, I knew that would have to be a novel. I knew there was much too much in it to cover in a short story. I mean, that's not to say that you couldn't cover huge things in short stories, because I think you can. But I think I wanted such a range, and I wanted it to be so many different people. But I think I was sort of, as you say, very frightened. I thought, oh no, can I actually tackle such a huge project? And what I had in my mind, because I had some success with short stories, I thought, I'm going to do it almost Elizabeth Strout style, as a selection of short stories, and each character will have a short story, sort of, before the death and after the death. Yeah. So that was my idea. But I just realised I didn't want to do that. Once I started, I thought, no, that's really keeping it too narrow. I want them to interact more. I want them to have, things that affect each other. And I just realised, no, this is a novel, and just go for it. And once I'd kind of really loosened myself from that short story structure, I think it really came alive.
You just went for it. And what was your actual path to publication? I mean, was this the first book? Was this Shining Life the first book that you actually wrote, or was it the first one to get published? Because there's often a difference.
Yes, I did in my 20s write a sort of rites of passage novel. So I had the experience of what an immense project it would be. And I think that was probably all right, that novel, but it was just very much a young person's novel, about kind of, growing up, really. And I was kind of aware that it probably didn't say anything that hadn't been said a million times before by other young people. And that was kind of part of what I wanted to forget about, really, when I stopped writing for a while. But I had the experience of kind of writing that number of words. But with this Shining Life, I think I just knew I had to finish it and get something that I really believed in before I started sending it off to agents.
And so, and tell me about that process. So when you actually, how long did that take? Because, lots of people finish something, then they rewrite it a few times, and then they still don't have the self-belief to actually send it out. So they tinker with it a little bit more, and that can go on for a long time. Some people just, do it, edit it a few times, think, right, this is it, and then start sending out. So kind of which camp did you fit into, do you think?
I think probably the second one, actually. I've got a fantastic writing group. So they read the book and I got kind of thumbs up from them. And I'd got something that I knew was finished and I felt was, fairly polished. So I just steeled myself, basically, and said, right, now is the time to send it to agents. And I was very scared. And I do remember kind of making myself a list and thinking, I'll start with the best agents first. But I actually kind of was almost too scared to send it. I remember I was going out for a walk and thinking, no, just make yourself send it to the ones that you most want to have. Just make yourself do it, because, what can happen apart from they say no? And I was incredibly lucky, and the agent that I most wanted to pick it up did. So that was absolutely fantastic.
That's great. And was that kind of a long process? Did it take a while to hear back? And
no, it was really quick. The thing that really amazes me about agents is, I quite often get an email that's been sent at 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And she said she'd been up all night reading it. And I just think, where do they get their energy from?
I know, yeah. And to read all that stuff.
Oh,
that's great. Well, how did you feel do you remember the day that you got the email back or the telephone call or whatever it was?
Yes. I'm smiling now as I think of it, because I'd got up really early that morning, not really expecting anything. And then I saw that there was this 6:30 email. And just saying, yes, I loved it. Please can I phone? And it was just like a dream, really. I was, she phoned at lunchtime and then said, right, we're going out for lunch. And it was just everything that was classic that you heard about, having an agent, as you get taken out for lunch and all of that. And, before I knew it, really, she was, talking it through with me. And we did do a bit of editing on the novel, according to her sort of thoughts.
Yeah.
And then it went on submission. And that was the terrifying bit, really. I was thinking, well, what if she's taken it up and nobody wants it? I think agents know what they're doing, don't they?
You'd hope so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And so when it went out and it did the rounds, and do you remember when it got picked up? How did that feel?
Yeah, I was at work. And so I think I was just sitting in the office and an email came through on my phone. And I know, I was thinking, probably shouldn't look at any emails, but just will. And it was just lovely because I had my colleagues around me and I was like, oh my God, look at this. I've got an offer on the book. And And I hadn't really known at all what to expect and how that would come. So it was really nice to kind of just rush round really and tell everyone at work. And then I went out and bought a massive amount of cheese, because people always buy cakes at work, don't they? But
They do.
I thought,
Yeah.
well, this is my book's got loads of cheese in. I'm going to buy
Yeah.
cheese, and so we all had cheese for lunch that
Oh,
day.
that's fantastic. So a great time. So how have you found the whole debut author thing? Is it everything you thought it would be?
Yes, it's been really good. I think I mean, everyone I think has a really bumpy road.
Sure.
You know, you talk to any debut, and they sort of say, oh yeah, and then, you know, I got COVID just as I was trying to do my
Yeah.
structural edits, or there's always something.
Well, and
I mean,
obviously you've been a debut author in the bizarrest time, so
yeah.
that's the other that's the other thing. And this is, I wouldn't say you could call this typical, could you really?
No, I mean, and in some ways it's great because I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, there were really absolutely high moments. I mean, when it was sold in America, and the editor phoned me from America, and she said, "Oh yes, I'm the editor for Salman Rushdie and Elizabeth Strout." I think I actually had to go and sit down. I was standing up, and I went and sat down because my legs were shaking. So that was really wonderful. You know, and what I really, really enjoyed was being edited. My editor, Susanna Wadeson in the UK, is just, her mind is so clear and strong. And I absolutely loved just having her input and then working on her ideas and seeing how brilliantly they worked. So I totally enjoyed all that. I did have quite a difficult time because sadly the editor, Susan Camille, who in America, when we were working together on the book and she was phoning me every day, she just suddenly stopped and basically she died.
Oh, that's sad.
Which was really sad, really upsetting, and just, you know, it was just awful for everybody, everyone who was working with her, and, you know, and a really big thing to deal with. And also, you know, we were sort of halfway through editing the book, so
Yeah.
it's a lot that we didn't know, you know, where things were going, because I think she had a very particular way of working and she'd sort of push you quite hard.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I'd worked on with her, I actually had to take out because we didn't know where, you know, she was going to take me with it. So it was, you know, that kind of added an extra year on, which in the end I was quite grateful for, because otherwise I would have been literally launching in the beginning of 2020. And I don't think that's been fun for anybody.
No.
So, you know, I had the privilege of at least seeing my book in a bookshop straight away, which is, of course,
that's great.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, not every author that I've spoken to, I would say, loves the editing process as much as it sounds like you do. So that's good. But what did you particularly enjoy about it? What do you think you learned from working with those different editors? What sorts of things do you think will kind of take you through or help you with your next project?
Yes. Well, I think the main thing I learned is don't put yourself in a book, because you're not as interesting as you think you are. So there was a character in the book who was, you know, she had this curly hair and she was a bit anxious, and she was sort of going around making what I thought were wonderful observations on what was going on, but she just wasn't adding to anything to the plot, and that was the most difficult thing I had to do, was take her out. But when she left the book, it was so much stronger. And I think that's the thing, is that there is this temptation to put your own kind of viewpoint in, and I just don't think you've got enough distance from it to make it worthwhile. And I think the other thing I learnt from working with editors is that everything needs to be travelling somewhere. So each scene that you've got, you need to sort of take the reader on a journey, so that they're being taken from one place to another by the end of that scene. And I started to think of it a bit like a graphic novel. So that, you know how in graphic novels, unless it's manga, it always goes from left to right. So the action, you've got someone walking along, they're always walking from left to right, and they just keep going. And all the sort of events take. And I thought, yes, I've got to be able to see in my mind's eye that people are moving literally from one place to another. And actually, I really found the more movement you have, in a scene, literally walking from one room to the other, you do feel like you're being carried. So I think that was like quite a surprise thing to learn.
Yeah.
So yes, again, not to have your characters sitting around on sofas discussing things, not interesting.
That's a really good piece of advice, yeah. And I suppose as regards, as you say, taking yourself out of the novel and thinking about your viewpoint, I'm sure that through all the characters and through the arc of the story and everything else, you're kind of doing that anyway without realising.
Yeah. I mean, I think every character is yourself to some extent anyway. I mean, because that's all you've ever got to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you fit writing around real life? Obviously, you've got a part-time job and you've got family and all the rest of it. So how do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's a lot easier now my children are older and I don't have to kind of, keep an eye on them. I mean, they just get older. But in the pandemic, it was quite hard because everybody was home, because I normally would just write while they were at school on the days off. And then, so at the moment I'm only working 2 days a week, which is great. So that gives me 3 days to write, and I would normally write while they were at school. So, that's actually quite a nice working day. But during the pandemic, that was impossible. I have my partner who's a musician working at home. He's a music therapist, so he'd be up in the loft making all sorts of strange noises, which I could hear. So what I quite often now, because and now that the kids are older as well, and they're actually more around, is I'll get up early, and I do really love the silence of an early morning. So I do try to be at my desk at 7. Get a good couple of hours in before people get up. And with teenagers, that can be up until about 12.
I was going to say, you could get a really long run at it, depending on how old they are, yeah. Yeah,
exactly. So that's quite good. So I think, I think that's the only way to do it. I think it all depends on how inspired I am, though. Some days it's just, I can get up at 6:30, be at the desk at 7, and I just don't write anything. So it all depends.
And do you know what you're going to write the next day? Or do you, when you finish one session, do you think, right, tomorrow I'm going to be tackling this chapter or this scene? Or how do you approach that?
Yeah, that's my ideal, is that I've kind of got a plan. And I think, yes, I'm going to write, I'm going to finish one scene. And then, but when that happens, it's heaven. I mean, that is the ideal thing. And it does happen sometimes. You write to the end of the scene, you know exactly what you're going to write in the morning. But I try not to worry about the times when that doesn't happen. I'm a real fan of free writing. So if I don't know where I am, or if I'm really stuck, I will just sit down and write the first thing that comes into my head. I'll write as fast as I can. I'll write about what it feels like to be me in that particular moment. And I sort of allow myself to scribble and get angry. Sometimes what I do is I'll notice that when I'm writing, I'll miswrite a word, and I'll think, I wonder if that word that I've written instead of the one I meant to is actually where my mind wants to go. So I'll try and follow it down those paths. So it's like a big sort of river with lots of tributaries. And I find that once I've started that process, actually, then I'll kind of go, oh yeah, I know what it is. I need to write such and such scene, and that's why I'm struggling, because it's been bothering me. So I very, very rarely write in the order of which, the plot is going to go. I just write what needs to be written.
You'll just pick out bits. I was talking to somebody, in my writing group, I was talking about that the other day, and we're kind of saying how hard that is to do for if you're not wired that way. I mean, I would love to do it. I love that advice. I've heard many people say it before, just write whatever you can. Like, if you've got an idea for a scene that's further into the book, then just write that. And I've tried it, but there's always a little voice in the back of my head saying, yeah, but you might not, when you get here, this might not be right, or it might not link up with the other bit that you're writing. And, I always find it really difficult. So it's interesting that you can do that.
I can, but I think it does. I mean, I think either way you end up doing loads of rewriting, because yes, what happens is you do write something far ahead, and then you think, oh yes, but now I've given them green Wellingtons, and they're going to have to get hold of those green Wellingtons from somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you do all of that. I mean, I think I just find I just don't trust myself anymore when I write in order. Somehow I just think this is boring.
Yeah.
I'm just writing because I'm trying to fill up the writing, the numbers of words that I have to write when I do it in order. I just sort of don't feel motivated, I think.
So it seems to be, especially with the advice that you picked up from the editing about the movement and everything else, that seems to be a big thing for you, this idea, this sense of movement. Just basically don't stand still.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't stand still. Just allow it to, I don't know, I mean, to flow through you. But, in the end, it doesn't always, one has to accept that, they have these ideals of flow and passion and, and it just doesn't happen. Sometimes it's just hard graft.
And so you mentioned the plan. Do you actually plan it out as regards a plot, or is it more like you've got a certain, as with This Shining Life, you had something you felt you wanted to say or that you wanted to explore, you wanted to talk about, but did you actually think about a plot or kind of how it was going to come together at all?
A little bit, but mostly it's a broad arc. I know where I want the characters to be by the time they've come to the end. I know that various things have got to happen to them at some point, and that's it really. And then it's normally a theme that I want to explore. So it was grief with This Shining Life. I just wanted to see how many different ways I could kind of portray what grief might mean to someone. So I mean, I've kind of tried thinking more about, well, you need a midpoint, you need a kind of instigation of the change and all of that, and I do try with that, but I find again it just kind of kills it off for me somehow.
Yeah.
I can do it afterwards. I can look at it afterwards when I've got my whole story and think, yep, it's saggy at page 75. I'm getting bored at page 200. Yeah. And I can think, oh, yeah, it's because there's not enough of, we don't know why they've got to this point. We need more of an instigation sort of thing. But so I think I kind of just do it backwards, really.
You just do it whichever way it works. And obviously it's clear that it's working for you. So let's not question it too much. What do you think drives you to write?
I think there is, that's a really good question. I think what I'm really interested in is what is going on for someone that is really true. So I'm interested in how people appear to be one thing and there's something else going on in their heads that we might not know about. So I think that really interests me, and I think there is a sense that I want to show that people are just full of love and compassion, however awful they can be sometimes. There is this kind of fountain of love that may be trapped, may be hidden, but that's really where I think people want to be. And the biggest tragedy really in life is when that can't show. I mean, I think that's what I'm interested in and what I'm sort of trying to get at always.
That's great. And if you were starting again tomorrow as a new writer, what, if anything, do you think you'd do differently, or what would you go back and tell your younger self?
I'd say you can do it. You can absolutely do it. Don't question the quality until you've got a finished piece, and believe that people want to hear what you've got to say, because I think that's my really deep fear, is that I might just be saying something that no one really cares about. And I just don't think, and what I've discovered, that just isn't true, and I don't think it's true about anything. I mean, people, if you've got something to say, there's always going to be someone who needs to hear it. So I think that's what I'd say, because I think I was really plagued with I'm not important enough to write as a younger person. So if I was setting out again, I'd say just say what you want to say. It's enough.
I think that's great advice, and I think that's probably something that all of us feel at times, or all of the time. I think we're all plagued with imposter syndrome to a certain extent, and that we probably shouldn't be here or expecting people to listen to us. So I think that's great advice. So as we kind of wrap things up, can you give us a sense of what's kind of up next? Remind people where they can find the book, and also where they can find out more about you.
Okay, so book will be in Waterstones. It is on Amazon. but you can also get it from hive.co.uk, anywhere where you would buy a book. And if you go into an independent book and it's not bookshop and it's not there, please order it, because that's always a wonderful thing to do. So yeah, that's where you can get the book. And if you want to find out more about me, I'm on Twitter. I'm Hare and Harriet. I'm also on Instagram as Harriet Kline. I do have a website, but I'm not very tech savvy. So, you can find stuff up about me, but not much. And then what's next? Another novel, hopefully. I think it's going to involve dogs. I've got to allow in my mind while I'm writing it the possibility that it's not going to work, and it may end up being a completely different novel that doesn't involve dogs or anything that I think it's going to involve at the moment. But with any luck, it does involve dogs.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Funny enough, I'm just reading Erica Waller's Dog Days.
Yes.
Have you read it?
I have. I mean, and she is a woman who really knows dogs, and I'm afraid that I might not know them quite as well as
you don't. You don't yet, but it's like the old writing adage goes. Write what you know. It's not really that. It's write what you want to know.
Exactly, and what you want to explore.
Yeah. So no, go for it. I say it sounds great.
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for coming on, Harriet. I really appreciate it. It's been lovely to chat to you. But thanks for coming on Joined Up Writing.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed myself so much.
Joined up writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Harriet, and I'll put all of her links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk, or you can find them in the podcast description on whatever device you're listening to this on. And you really should check out This Shining Life, and don't be put off by the fact it's literary fiction. It's funny, moving, and fast-paced. So that's pretty much it for this week, but don't forget to get in touch with all your thoughts on the show, feedback, and to tell me what's going on in your writing world. And you can do that by dropping me an email at wayne@waynekellyWrites.com. Also, remember to find the entire back catalogue of interviews, and it's a lot, by the way, on the website. And make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. And that way, you can have the podcast downloaded automatically every week. Also, remember to leave us a nice rating and review, won't you, on Apple Podcasts or wherever else, because it really does help others to find the show, or just recommend it to one of your friends or lots of your friends. Okay, so that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.